But we have some questions. Some of our viewers have sent some questions that they would want you to respond to and make it very simple. I have to simplify it. The first one says, this one is from Sandy in Abuja. He said, I'm trying to understand what you are saying. Are you talking about someone to come and borrow money from consumer credit scheme, no interest, or who is entitled to do that? Is this single person or a corporate organization? Please make me understand. That is one. Then the second one says, good morning, Nigeria and crew in the studio. What are you doing about those civil servants from states employed that have registered successfully and are yet to be disbursed? What are you doing about that? This ATS Jonah Uduyang from Uyo, Akwa Ibom State. Then this one says, good morning. Good morning, please. Why is individual loan limited to just 6 months repayment only? And what is the maximum an individual can get? So why is this limited? And this one says, what are the interest rates for individual and business loans? This from Akim, Lagos. The question is from Akim, Lagos. This one says, good morning, sir. In fact, I've been watching and listening to Mr. Uzoma during your interview at Good Morning Nigeria on consumer credit. How can I assess it? Because in the process of answering some questions, the NEPA took the light, so I could not get more info. So maybe he wants to get money to buy solar. So in the process of this is from Mrs. Oyewole.
I'm just wondering how she wants to get the response now. I mean, if he responds,
she will go to YouTube. I mean,
okay.
It will be posted on YouTube so she can get her response.
All right, let me read out some of the questions I also have. I'm sure you're noting them down, so you just answer in one breath. This one says, good morning. My name is Bainta Abdullahi. Please, what is the maximum amount that can be given and maximum payback period? Another one says, good morning. Please, I want to make inquiry about the credit consumer scheme. Well, this one says, where's your office? In Abuja. That's Mr. Daniel Peter. And this one says, greetings everyone in the studio. I tried to access your website to require for loan last year with my techno phone as a civil servant, but it wasn't opening. Can all phone access your registration now? I also need your current website as well as your office address. Thank you. That's coming from Vincent in Abuja. Looks like your website is phone sensitive. Well, this one says, good morning all. This seems to be a good initiative. However, I hope and pray for equity, fairness, and level playing ground in the disbursement of funds. Babajide from Abuja and says, how can I access the CREDICORP helpline? All right, MD.
Thank you very much for those questions. Some of them are related, so I'm just going to put them in groups. So help me understand who is eligible. I think there's a question about eligibility. It's really any Nigerian who has an income. So if you are unemployed, then CREDICORP is not for you. There are other things for you, but not CREDICORP, because you need to be able to pay back your loan.
Okay.
What if you're sacked?
Then CREDICORP is no longer for you.
I mean, if I've gotten the loan before the job goes away, what happens?
But that's why we work with financial institutions, because this is an age-old. We didn't invent consumer credit. This is almost a 400-year-old concept. Right? So of course there's risk in lending, and that becomes a risk that the financial institution has to bear. But they make those assessments before they give you the credit. So if you are, the question that was, is it just for single? I mean, I guess they mean individuals, not single.
Individual, yes.
Married. Yes, it is. Consumer credit is entirely lending to
not corporate
individuals. So you borrow as yourself. I borrow as Uzoma. Even if you borrow that money to do some sort of micro enterprise, because Nigeria, if we find that half of the demand for our consumer credit is actually people wanting to borrow in their personal capacity, but wanting to use it for some sort of enterprise, and that is completely fine. It is still consumer credit. Okay. The same, it is no different from your celebrated let's say, celebrity entrepreneurs, maybe even in other countries, that say they maxed out their credit card to start their business. Most times when you want to start a business, you don't have a limited liability company that has collateral and assets that can go to a bank and say, lend Uzoma Limited or Uzoma and Friends Limited. So you have to go use your own personal credit to start a business. So the same thing. Individuals limited to 6 months, I'm not sure where that comes from, but let me just explain the concept on how much you can borrow and what tenure you can borrow. Again, this is me echoing the processes that have been defined at the financial institutions. I have to continue to emphasize this, that the major difference between us and, say, the People's Bank, and this is not me taking anything away from the People's Bank. In fact, I believe in continuation. That is the mistakes of the People's Bank that we are learning from and not repeating them. And as we continue to improve, obviously I don't expect CREDICORP to die. But the mistakes that we make now is the next CREDICORP will learn from.
But if you're saying that you don't expect CREDICORP to die, the fact that it's dependent on government at the moment, what happens? I mean...
No, we're not always going to be dependent on government. Government is just starting and catalyzing with its funding. As we speak, we're in active discussions with multilaterals to diversify our capital base and bring in, obviously, more funding. And not just funding for the sake of money, but to diversify our shareholding as well. So it is less dependent on the government. Okay. This is important for the sustainability of an institution like this. I think for the amount of work that it requires to get something like this off the ground, it will be quite tragic for it not to last pretty much forever. So we are very adamant about making sure that we're doing that. So individuals are not limited to 6 months. So what that means is if you want to borrow money for consumer credit, forget CREDICORP for a second. You wanted to borrow money from a financial institution. Now today, or historically, they typically would not, because it is easier for them to put the money in treasury bills or to buy government bonds or to lend to corporates, to lend to Shell. But over time, that's increasing. I'm not saying banks never lend to consumer credit. They've always done, but just not at the scale that we're trying to get to. But over time, that's changing, enabled by some of the efforts like what CREDICORP is doing. Now, if you go to the financial institution and you want to borrow money, what they do is that they check your income first. They need to have a point of view as to what you earn. Now, by law, the labor laws stipulate that you cannot borrow money where your monthly repayment would be more than 1/3 of your income that month. In other words, if I'm earning 100,000 naira per month, I cannot borrow money where I am paying more than 33,000 naira per month in repayment. So it's actually fairly easy to calculate, at least legally, what your credit limit should be based on your income. And the next variable that comes into play is the tenure of the loan. So that means that if I earn 100,000 naira per month, or let's make it simpler, let's say that I earn 300,000 naira a month, I cannot borrow any money where I'm paying more than 100,000 naira of my 300k per month. That means that if my loan is a 3-year loan, that is 36 months, then roughly, if I'm not counting interest yet, then roughly I should be able to borrow 3.6 million naira now. And then I'll be paying 100,000 naira every month for 3 years. That can get me 10 laptops, that can get me 1 keke, that can get me 2 motorbikes, that can get me a solar home system, that can educate 2 of my kids, that can get me medical access, that can allow me to refurnish my living room, my home.
You just talked about educating your kid. Is that part of the schemes you're sponsoring?
We don't have a student loan scheme specifically because obviously the government has one.
That's
there's a NEL fund. Now, NEL fund is targeting, that's our sister institution. We work quite closely together, and obviously those are 2 sort of baby initiatives of the president. When I say baby, these are initiatives that were birthed entirely on account of President Tinubu's administration. And so the NEL fund scheme is targeting university students, polytechnics, and increasingly getting into sort of artisans and all that. But if you wanted to get consumer credit to, say, educate your child outside of the university,
okay,
then you still have to default to just general consumer credit.
Okay.
That's what I mean by that.
What about those, the question about those from states that have applied but are yet to be disbursed?
Yes. So the question was, so the again, it depends. It depends. I have to understand the person's sort of particular situation.
Your beneficiaries
But-
so far, are they those just in the FCT or it's spread across the country?
Oh, we have beneficiaries in every single state, for sure. And civil servants in every single state as well. So it's not
Was this
even just
from
federal
your actually
civil
Akwa Ibom
servants.
state?
So he was talking about being a state civil servant. So what we have to do, we have to understand specifically that case and what is it that they weren't qualified, is it that they didn't get the feedback. But we find that when we work with the financial institutions like Credit Direct, for example, which is one of the financial institutions that's very strong in the civil service, we have a couple more of them like that. Then the civil servant just applies directly to them as long as they can provide their identification number. In the federal is IPPIS, in the states there's a version of that as well. Then they're able to deduct their income.
Now, when you say civil servant, I mean that's just a few of the number of Nigerians that we have in the country. And you know, for those who are not civil servants, they're like, oh well, all government initiatives are targeted at those who work for them.
No, I'm saying that because the civil
how are you
servant,
incorporating those who are not in the civil service?
it's the same thing. I'm only mentioning civil service because the person who
Because, yeah.
spoke
Okay.
is a civil servant. So I'm saying now that I know this is a civil servant, I know that they will go to seek credit as a civil servant. And so it's easy, it's actually even easier to assess a civil servant. Because honestly, I just need to know how much you earn. And I need to, when I say I mean the financial institution. I need to have access to withdraw the repayments from source. For the regular, right now it's about 35% of our beneficiary base at civil servant. When we started, it was almost 100%. But as we grew, we started diversifying away from the civil servants. As the financial institution partners that we had also grew, we had more financial institution partners that were stronger outside of the civil service, that had ways of profiling and assessing people for credit outside of the civil service. Even now, not even just people who have white-collar jobs, but entrepreneurs and people who have some sort of vocation. They can see your credit profile, they can see your credit history, they can make an informed decision as to how much your cash flow is and how much you can handle credit-wise. So it's not just even people who are salaried workers. But for that civil servant, we have to understand the particular case. But we have quite a number of civil servants, even in Akwa Ibom, who are beneficiaries of this scheme. On interest rates for individual loans and businesses, first of all, there's no consumer credit from CREDICORP that is going to businesses, and in other words, a company. But there is consumer credit that goes to individuals who still use the funding, the money for business, which are two different things. And I spoke about interest rates earlier. It depends on what you are. If we are a targeted group that we're trying to intervene on, let's say youth or women or local manufacturing, you can go as low as single digits. If you're not, then you can go, we lend to the banks at 18%. That means that you find that we end up being the absolute lowest, cheapest consumer credit in the country, period. Just you can't buy none. You just can't find the credit at this low because consumer lending by just its current design in a country is quite expensive. The MPR, monetary policy rate of the country, is 27.5%, roughly, just because I was asked to say it in simple terms. Basically, the floor, the bottom interest rate at which banks even access capital, especially from each other, is about 27.5%,
Okay.
roughly speaking. That means that for them to then add their own spread, because they have to add the money that they used to build branches and buy generators and have lights, that you probably don't get consumer credit that is anything less than north of 30% or 40%.
Okay, Doctor, Mr. Osama, let's just get